The night was silent, except for the soft rustling of the trees as the wind passed through the dense forest. Daniel Carter sat on the porch of his small cabin, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands. It was a peaceful night, exactly why he had chosen to live so far from the city. But peace never lasted long. A sound, something unusual, made him sit up. It wasn't an animal. It was too light, too careful, like someone trying not to be heard. His military instincts kicked in instantly. He placed his cup down and reached for the hunting knife strapped to his side. Then he saw her. A woman stood at the edge of the clearing, half hidden behind a tree. Even in the darkness, Daniel could tell she wasn't normal. Her violet skin shimmered faintly under the moonlight. Her silver eyes reflected light like a predator's. She was tall, slender, yet there was an undeniable strength in the way she held herself. Daniel's grip on his knife tightened. "Who are you?" he demanded. The woman stepped forward, her movements cautious but graceful. "Please," she said in a voice that was soft, yet firm. "I need shelter." Daniel narrowed his eyes. Her accent was strange, her words slightly off, like someone who had learned English but wasn't used to speaking it. His instincts screamed danger, but something about her posture, tense, almost desperate, made him hesitate. "I don't know who you are," he said, keeping his distance. "But you need to leave." The woman shook her head. "I cannot. They are looking for me." Daniel's stomach tightened. "They?" Before he could ask more, she suddenly staggered, clutching her side. That was when he noticed the dark stains spreading across her clothing. She was injured. He cursed under his breath. This wasn't just some lost traveler. She had been running. She was bleeding. And if she was telling the truth, someone was hunting her. Daniel had seen enough chases and battles in his time. He knew that whoever was after her wouldn't stop until they found her. If she stayed outside, she wouldn't survive the night. Every part of his training told him to stay out of it. This wasn't his fight. But his conscience wouldn't let him turn his back. "Come inside," he muttered, stepping aside. The woman hesitated for just a second before nodding. She moved quickly but with silent precision, as if trained to avoid making noise. Definitely not human, Daniel thought. Inside, he guided her to a chair. The cabin was simple: wooden walls, a stone fireplace, and shelves lined with survival gear. He grabbed a med kit and a damp cloth, then knelt beside her. "Lift your arm," he ordered. She hesitated, then obeyed. As he pulled up the torn fabric of her clothing, he saw the wound. A deep gash, though the bleeding had already slowed. But the strangest part was the skin around it. It was already beginning to heal, the torn flesh slowly closing, as if her body was regenerating faster than normal. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That's not human." "I am not human," she admitted. He scoffed. "Yeah, I figured." For a few minutes, he worked in silence, cleaning the wound and wrapping a bandage around it. He wasn't a doctor, but he had patched up enough wounds during his years in service. Finally, he sat back. "So, you're an alien. That much is obvious. But why are you here? What do you want from me?" The woman met his gaze. "I need protection." Daniel crossed his arms. "From who?" She hesitated. "My people." That caught him off guard. "Your own people?" She nodded. "They will find me soon. If they do, they will erase me, and anyone who helped me." Daniel let out a slow breath. So now he was in danger too. "Great. Why should I help you?" he asked bluntly. The woman's silver eyes softened, and for the first time, she looked truly vulnerable. "Because I can give you something no other human has ever had." Daniel frowned. "And what's that?" She parted her lips to speak. Boom. A distant explosion shook the ground. Daniel jumped to his feet, his hand already reaching for his rifle. The woman's expression turned grim. "They have arrived," she whispered. Daniel looked out the window, scanning the tree line. In the distance, he saw a faint glow in the sky. Not fire, Not lightning, but something unnatural. His mind raced. He had taken in a fugitive alien princess, and now her pursuers were coming for her. This night had just turned into something far more dangerous than he had ever expected. And somehow, he had a feeling it was only the beginning. The glow in the sky grew brighter. Daniel could see faint shadows moving in the trees, their outlines barely visible in the moonlight. Whoever was after Soraya was close. Daniel shut the cabin's lights off. "Get away from the window," he whispered. Soraya obeyed, stepping into the shadows. Despite her injuries, she moved silently, like a trained fighter. Daniel grabbed his rifle and peered through a small gap in the curtains. His cabin was deep in the mountains. No one came here by accident. The fact that someone had found them this fast meant one thing. Soraya was being tracked. He turned to her. "Tell me what's going on. Right now." Soraya hesitated, her silver eyes flickering toward the door, as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. "I told you, my people are looking for me." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "Yeah, and I bet there's a lot more to the story." She sighed, as if finally deciding there was no more time for secrets. "I am a princess of the Zinthari Empire." Daniel frowned. "A princess? That was unexpected. If you're royalty, why are you running?" She hesitated before speaking again. "Because I refused to do what they wanted. I refused to follow the rules of my people." Daniel crossed his arms. "And what exactly did they want you to do?" Her gaze darkened. "To marry someone I do not trust. To become part of a war I do not believe in." Daniel let out a breath. Great. He was hiding a runaway alien princess from a galactic empire. Just another normal night in the mountains. Before he could respond, a strange humming noise filled the air. It was soft, almost like a whisper, but it made the hairs on Daniel's neck stand up. Soraya's eyes widened. "They're scanning the area." Daniel didn't waste time. He grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward a trapdoor near the fireplace. "Basement. Now." She followed, and they climbed down into the underground storage room. Daniel's bunker wasn't fancy, just concrete walls, emergency supplies, and a backup generator. But it was hidden. He shut the trapdoor just as a beam of blue light swept across the cabin above them. The hum grew louder. Soraya's breath was shaky. They have technology that can detect life signs. Daniel looked around. He had thermal blankets stored in a corner, leftover military gear designed to block body heat signatures. He grabbed one and wrapped it around Soraya. "This should hide you." She looked at him in surprise. "You are very prepared for someone who lives alone." Daniel grabbed a backpack and began stuffing supplies inside. Water, weapons, medical kits. "We can't stay here. If they come back, they'll search everything." Soraya nodded. "I know a place where they cannot track me." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And where's that?" She hesitated. "I cannot say yet." Daniel sighed. "Not exactly helping your case, princess." Soraya looked at him, something shifting in her expression. "You are risking your life for me. You do not have to." Daniel met her gaze. "Yeah, well, I have a rule. If someone's running for their life, I don't just stand and watch." Soraya studied him for a moment. Then, to his surprise, she gave him a small smile. "Your kind is different from what I was taught." Daniel shrugged. Humans are full of surprises. A strange offer. As they stepped outside into the night, Soraya touched his arm. "Daniel." He turned to her. She took a deep breath. "You asked me what I could offer in return for your help." Daniel nodded. "Yeah, you said something about giving me what no other human has ever had." Soraya hesitated, then finally spoke. "I can bond my mind to yours." Daniel frowned. "What?" She continued. "In my culture, a bond is rare. It allows a connection between two beings, sharing knowledge, skills, and even instincts." Daniel stared at her. "That sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie." Soraya's expression was serious. "It is real. but no human has ever survived it. Daniel exhaled. Great, that's comforting. She stepped closer. But if you do, you will be stronger, faster. You will understand things no human has ever known. Daniel considered this. He had been in dangerous situations before, but this was something else entirely. In the distance, a blue light flashed through the trees. The enemy was still out there. Daniel sighed. Let's get out of here first. Then we'll talk about your crazy alien magic. Soraya nodded, and together, they vanished into the forest, running toward the unknown. The forest was dark, the thick canopy above blocking most of the moonlight. Daniel and Soraya moved quickly, their footsteps barely making a sound. Daniel led the way, his military instincts guiding him through the dense trees, while Soraya followed close behind, her breathing slightly uneven. She was still weak from her injury, but she pushed forward without complaint. Behind them, faint blue lights flickered through the trees. The patrol hadn't given up yet. Daniel gritted his teeth. They're tracking her. But how? He stopped and turned to Soraya. How are they still following us? You said your little energy trick messed up their scanners. Soraya hesitated, glancing back toward the lights in the distance. It did, but they must have switched to manual tracking. They are trained hunters. Daniel muttered a curse. He had been hunted before, but never by aliens with advanced technology. He had no idea what kind of tricks they had. We need to throw them off, he said. We can't just keep running. Soraya looked at him, her silver eyes reflecting the faint light. What do you suggest? Daniel thought fast. They needed a distraction. He quickly scanned the area, then pointed to a fallen tree. There's a stream beyond that. If we walk through it, it'll mask our scent and footprints. Soraya nodded without question, following him as he moved toward the water. As they reached the stream, Daniel knelt and scooped some mud into his hands. Cover your arms and legs with this. It'll mess with any heat sensors they might be using. Soraya didn't hesitate. She took the mud and smeared it over her exposed skin. You are very skilled at evading pursuers, she remarked. Daniel smirked. Not my first time. They stepped into the cold water, moving carefully downstream. The current wasn't strong, but the icy chill made Soraya shiver. Daniel stayed close, watching her in case she needed support. For several minutes they waded through the stream in silence. The sound of the running water helped mask their movements. Then, finally, the blue lights faded into the distance. Daniel exhaled in relief. That should buy us some time. Soraya glanced back, still tense. For now, a temporary shelter. They continued moving for another hour before they finally reached a small abandoned cabin deep in the woods. It looked old, with broken windows and vines creeping up the walls, but it would do. Daniel pushed open the door cautiously. The air inside was damp, filled with the scent of rotting wood. Not exactly a palace, princess, but it'll have to do. Soraya stepped inside, her movements slow from exhaustion. It is enough. Daniel found an old blanket and handed it to her. Rest. I'll keep watch. She hesitated. You need rest too. Daniel shook his head. I'll be fine. Soraya sat down near the wall, pulling the blanket around her. She watched him silently as he checked the door and windows, making sure they were secure. After a few minutes, she spoke. You never asked me why I chose to come to Earth. Daniel glanced at her. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready. She sighed, looking down. My people see your kind as lesser, primitive. They do not believe humans are strong enough to stand among the stars. Daniel chuckled dryly. Sounds familiar. Plenty of people on Earth think that way about others too. Soraya looked up at him. But I do not believe that. I have studied your species. I have seen your history, your resilience. And now, you have proven it to me. Daniel raised an eyebrow. How so? She gave a tired smile. You should have left me. Helping me put you in danger. And yet you chose to fight for someone you barely know. Daniel shrugged. I don't like watching people get hunted. Simple as that. Soraya's gaze softened. That is why humans are different. That is why I came here. Because I believe you have the strength to change the future. Daniel wasn't sure how to respond to that. He had never thought of himself as someone who could change anything. He was just a guy trying to live in peace. But now, that peace was gone. The strange bond. Soraya hesitated before speaking again. Daniel, the offer I made before. The bond. I was not lying. Daniel sighed, rubbing his temple. Yeah, about that. You said no human has ever survived it. She nodded. It is dangerous. But if you succeed, you will gain knowledge beyond your world's limits. Daniel exhaled. And what happens if I fail? Soraya didn't answer immediately. Then, softly, she said, your mind will not withstand it. You will be lost. Daniel let out a slow breath. So basically, it's either become something greater or lose everything. He studied her carefully. There was no deception in her eyes. Whatever this bond was, she truly believed in it. After a long moment, he spoke. We'll talk about it later. First, we need to survive the night. Soraya nodded. Agreed. But deep down, Daniel knew. This was only the beginning. The small abandoned cabin was cold and damp. But for now, it was their only safe place. Daniel sat near the door, his rifle resting across his lap. Soraya was on the opposite side, wrapped in the old blanket, her silver eyes reflecting the dim light from the moon outside. The silence between them stretched for a long time. Both were exhausted, but neither could sleep. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. Tell me more about this bond. Soraya looked at him, her expression unreadable. You are considering it. Daniel shrugged. I don't like going into something blind. So tell me, what exactly does it do? Soraya hesitated before answering. It is a rare connection among my people. When the bond is formed, it links two minds, allowing them to share knowledge, instincts, and even emotions. Daniel frowned. Like telepathy? Not exactly. Soraya said. It is deeper than that. It is a merging of understanding. If done correctly, you would be able to think as I do, fight as I do, and even sense danger before it comes. Daniel leaned back against the wall, processing the information. It sounded impossible. But then again, so did standing in a cabin with an alien princess while being hunted by unknown enemies. What's the catch? He asked. Soraya lowered her gaze. No human has ever survived it. Your mind may not be able to handle the connection. It could break you. Daniel exhaled slowly. So either I become stronger, or I lose myself completely. Soraya nodded. Yes. Daniel chuckled dryly. Great. Just the kind of risk I love. Soraya studied him. Why are you even considering it? Daniel looked away for a moment before answering. Because I don't see another way out of this. He gestured toward the window. Your people aren't going to stop hunting you. If I want to survive, I need an advantage. Soraya was silent for a moment. Then she spoke softly. You are brave, Daniel Carter. Daniel scoffed. I don't know about that. Soraya gave a small smile. You are willing to risk yourself for someone you barely know. That is not something most beings would do. Daniel didn't reply. He wasn't sure how to explain it. Maybe it was his military past, or maybe he just hated seeing someone hunted like an animal. Either way, he couldn't turn his back on her now. The hunters return. Suddenly, Soraya stiffened. Her silver eyes narrowed, and her body tensed as if sensing something. Daniel noticed instantly. What is it? They are close, she whispered. Daniel quickly moved to the window and peered outside. At first, he saw nothing but trees and shadows. Then, a faint blue glow flickered in the distance. He cursed under his breath. They found us. Soraya stood up, pulling the blanket off her shoulders. We must leave. Daniel grabbed his backpack and rifle. We can't just run forever. They'll keep tracking us. Soraya's expression hardened. Then we fight. Daniel looked at her, surprised by the sudden determination in her voice. Fight. We're outnumbered and outgunned. Soraya stepped closer. Not if we bond. Daniel hesitated. This was it, the moment of decision. If he refused, they would have to keep running. But if he accepted, he didn't know what would happen to him. Outside, the blue lights grew brighter. Time was running out. Daniel exhaled. Fine. Let's do it. The bonding ritual. Soraya stepped toward him, placing her hands on the sides of his head. Her silver eyes began to glow brighter, and Daniel felt a sudden warmth spreading through his skull. A pulse of energy rushed through him, like fire and ice colliding inside his mind. His vision blurred. He felt his thoughts stretching, twisting, merging with something vast and alien. He saw flashes of memories that weren't his own. Soraya's past, her training, her knowledge of combat, of strategy, of survival. And then, pain. Daniel gritted his teeth as his mind burned. It was too much. He felt like he was drowning in an ocean of thoughts that weren't his. Stay with me. Soraya's voice echoed in his head. Focus. Daniel clenched his fists, forcing himself to breathe. He held on, gripping the edges of his consciousness as he fought against the overwhelming force. Then, suddenly, clarity. His vision sharpened. His muscles felt lighter, stronger. He could sense the movements outside, almost as if he could feel the enemies approaching. The bond was complete. Daniel exhaled. That was intense. Soraya studied him carefully. You are still you. Daniel flexed his fingers. He felt different, but he was still himself. Yeah, I think so. Soraya let out a relieved breath. Then we fight. The ambush. The blue lights outside grew brighter as the enemy drew closer. Daniel adjusted his grip on his rifle, but somehow he already knew where to aim. His body moved with a new awareness, as if every instinct had been sharpened. The first enemy stepped into view, a tall figure clad in dark armor with glowing symbols on its chest. Daniel didn't hesitate. Crack! A single, perfect shot hit the enemy before it could react. It collapsed instantly. Soraya looked at him in shock. That was incredible. Daniel smirked. I know. The others rushed forward, but Daniel was already moving. He ducked, rolled, and fired again, every motion smooth, every shot precise. Soraya joined the fight, her movements now perfectly in sync with his. They weren't just fighting side by side. They were connected. Within minutes, the last enemy fell. The forest fell silent once more. Daniel exhaled, lowering his rifle. That was insane. Soraya turned to him, her silver eyes still glowing faintly. Now you understand. Daniel looked down at his hands. He could still feel the bond inside him, like a second heartbeat. Soraya placed a hand on his arm. You are the first human to survive the bond. Daniel met her gaze. And I'm guessing that means I'm not just a normal human anymore. Soraya smiled. No, you are something more now. Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of those words. Whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same again. And for the first time, he was ready. The forest was eerily silent after the battle. The bodies of the fallen enemies lay scattered, their dark armor reflecting the pale moonlight. Daniel lowered his rifle, his heart still pounding in his chest. He had never moved like that before, so precise, so fast, so aware. Soraya stood beside him, her silver eyes still glowing faintly. She watched him carefully. How do you feel? Daniel flexed his fingers, feeling the strange energy still coursing through him. His mind was sharper, his reflexes faster. He could even sense movements in the distance. Something was coming. He exhaled. Different. Stronger. Soraya nodded. The bond has awakened something in you, but it will take time to fully adjust. Daniel wasn't sure what that meant, but he didn't have time to think about it. The danger wasn't over. More would come. He turned toward Soraya. "We need to move." She agreed. Together, they stepped over the fallen enemies and disappeared into the shadows of the forest. A new kind of awareness. As they moved through the dense trees, Daniel realized he could feel everything around him. The way the branches swayed in the wind, the distant sounds of animals moving, and something else. He stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. "There's someone ahead." Soraya tensed. "Are you sure?" Daniel closed his eyes, focusing. He could sense two figures waiting behind a cluster of rocks about 50 meters ahead. He had no idea how he knew this, but he knew. Soraya watched him with curiosity. "You are sensing them through the bond. Your mind is expanding." Daniel didn't have time to process that. "We go around," he whispered. They moved carefully, taking a longer path through the trees. Daniel's new awareness helped him navigate perfectly, avoiding dry leaves and broken branches. He felt like he had been hunting his entire life. The enemy patrol never even noticed them. The hidden enemy. After an hour of walking, they reached a rocky hill that overlooked the valley below. Daniel crouched near the edge, scanning the area. What he saw made his stomach tighten. A small Scifi outpost had been set up in the clearing. Dozens of soldiers in dark armor moved around, speaking in an alien language. Daniel muttered a curse. They set up a base here. Soraya's expression darkened. They are preparing for a full search. Daniel clenched his jaw. They were serious about finding her. He studied the outpost carefully. The soldiers were well armed, and there were strange floating drones scanning the area. It was only a matter of time before they expanded their search. "We need to take that outpost down," Daniel said. Soraya looked at him in surprise. "That is too dangerous." Daniel shook his head. "If we don't, they'll find us eventually. We need to destroy their ability to track us." Soraya hesitated. "You think we can win?" Daniel smirked. "You saw what we did back there. Now imagine what we can do if we plan it right." Soraya studied him for a moment, then slowly nodded. "All right, we fight." Planning the attack, Daniel spent the next few minutes studying the outpost, memorizing movements, weaknesses, and escape routes. His mind processed information faster than ever before. He saw openings, patterns, and weak points with absolute clarity. Soraya watched him, amazed. "Your mind is adapting quickly." Daniel didn't respond. He was too focused. After a few moments, he spoke. "All right, we take out the power source first. That will shut down their scanners and drones." Soraya nodded. "And then?" Daniel smirked. "Then we hit hard and fast." Soraya placed a hand on his arm. "I will fight beside you." Daniel nodded. "Let's do this." The ambush. They moved silently through the trees, using the darkness as their cover. Daniel's enhanced senses guided them, helping them avoid detection. As they reached the edge of the outpost, Daniel spotted a generator near the center. That was their target. Soraya whispered, "I will disable the guards near the entrance." "You take the generator." Daniel nodded. Soraya vanished into the shadows, moving with unnatural grace. Within seconds, the first guard fell without a sound. Daniel moved toward the generator. His heart pounded, but his body moved without hesitation. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small explosive charge he had taken from the previous battle. He placed it carefully on the side of the generator, setting a 10-second timer. Then, he ran. The explosion shook the entire outpost. The lights flickered, the drones crashed to the ground, and the soldiers shouted in confusion. Soraya leaped from the shadows, striking down an enemy before they could react. Daniel grabbed his rifle and opened fire. His aim was perfect, every shot landing exactly where he intended. It felt effortless. The Scifi soldiers tried to fight back, but they were disoriented. Daniel and Soraya moved too fast, too precise. Within minutes, the outpost was in ruins. The last enemy fell, and silence returned to the valley. Daniel exhaled, lowering his rifle. That went better than expected. Soraya wiped a streak of blood from her cheek and smiled. You are no longer just human. Daniel looked down at his hands. He still felt the bond inside him, like a fire burning just beneath the surface. Something had changed in him, and he wasn't sure if he could ever go back. Soraya stepped closer. They will know we did this. More will come. Daniel nodded. Then we'll be ready. Soraya studied him for a moment, then nodded. Yes, we will. As they disappeared into the forest once again, Daniel knew one thing for sure. This war was just beginning. And now he had the power to fight it. The night air was thick with smoke from the destroyed Scifi outpost. The once active enemy base now lay in ruins, its power source obliterated. Sparks flickered from broken equipment, and the faint hum of burning metal filled the air. Daniel crouched near the edge of the clearing, scanning for movement. His heart pounded, but his breathing was steady. The bond with Soraya had changed him. His reflexes were sharper, his mind faster, and his awareness heightened beyond anything he had ever known. Soraya stood beside him, watching the horizon. They will not take this lightly, she said softly. Daniel nodded. They'll come back stronger. She turned to him. Are you afraid? Daniel smirked. No, I'm ready. The enemy regroups. The low humming sound echoed in the distance. Daniel's enhanced senses picked up something massive approaching. A ship. Soraya's expression darkened. They sent reinforcements. Daniel quickly scanned the area. How many? Soraya closed her eyes, focusing. Then she exhaled sharply. More than we can fight. Daniel clenched his jaw. We need an escape plan. Soraya shook her head. They will track us. As long as I am here, they will never stop hunting me. Daniel looked at her. Then we finish this. Here. Now. Soraya hesitated. You want to fight? Daniel's grip tightened on his rifle. We can't keep running. We take them down, or they take us. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Then we fight. Setting the trap. They had little time. Daniel quickly assessed the battlefield, using his enhanced instincts to form a plan. The outpost was already destroyed, but there were remnants of alien technology scattered across the site. We use their own weapons against them, Daniel said. Soraya nodded. What do you have in mind? Daniel pointed to a damaged Scifi turret, still half intact. I can rig that into a remote bomb. Soraya's eyes gleamed with understanding. And the enemy won't expect it. Working quickly, Daniel stripped wires and repurposed explosives from fallen Scifi weapons. His hands moved faster than ever, his mind calculating every detail with precision. Within minutes, he had set a chain of traps, energy explosives hidden beneath wreckage, pressure-sensitive triggers along the path, and the modified turret wired as a final detonator. Soraya watched him, impressed. Your people truly are dangerous. Daniel smirked. You have no idea. The battle begins. The ship arrived, hovering above the battlefield. Its engines roared, kicking up dust and debris. The hatch opened, and Scifi soldiers poured out, their weapons gleaming under the moonlight. Daniel and Soraya stayed hidden, watching. One soldier stepped forward, a commander, judging by his heavier armor and the markings on his chest. His voice rang out in an alien language. But Daniel didn't need a translator. They were looking for Soraya. Daniel met Soraya's gaze. Let's welcome them. She nodded. Together. Daniel raised his rifle. The fight began. The ambush. The first explosion ripped through the battlefield. As soon as the Scifi stepped into the trap, energy pulses surged through the air, sending enemies flying. Daniel moved instantly, firing precise shots. Each bullet hit its mark, dropping enemies before they could react. Soraya darted between shadows, her movements impossibly fast. She struck with lethal precision, using both her energy blade and her bare hands. The enemy scrambled, confused and disoriented. They had expected an easy hunt. They were wrong. The final confrontation. The Zinthuri commander roared in frustration. He lifted his weapon, a massive plasma rifle, and aimed at Soraya. Daniel's instincts kicked in. He saw the shot before it happened. Moving on pure instinct, he lunged forward, shoving Soraya aside just as the plasma bolt fired. The blast barely missed, scorching the ground where Soraya had stood. Daniel rolled, raising his rifle. One shot, one chance. He fired. The bullet pierced the commander's armor, hitting the weak point near his neck. The alien staggered, choking on his own breath. Soraya moved in, delivering the final strike, her energy blade slicing through the commander's chest. The Zinthuri fell. And just like that, the battle was over. Victory, for now. The remaining soldiers hesitated, their leader dead. Then, without warning, they retreated, rushing back to their ship. Within moments, the enemy vessel lifted off, disappearing into the sky. Daniel exhaled, lowering his rifle. We won. Soraya stood beside him, watching the sky. For now. Daniel nodded. He could still feel the bond inside him, stronger than before. This battle had changed him. He wasn't just a human anymore. He turned to Soraya. What happens next? She looked at him, her silver eyes filled with something new, hope. We find out why they want me dead, she said, and we fight back. Daniel smirked. Then let's get started. Together, they walked away from the battlefield, two warriors against an empire. This was far from over, but Daniel was ready. He was no longer just a man. He was something more. The battlefield was silent. The Zinthuri soldiers had retreated, their leader defeated. The destroyed outpost lay in ruins, smoke rising into the cold night air. The fight was over. For now. Daniel took a deep breath, lowering his rifle. He could still feel the energy inside him, the bond with Soraya pulsing like a second heartbeat. His reflexes, his awareness, everything had changed. He wasn't just human anymore. Soraya stood beside him, watching the sky where the enemy ship had disappeared. They will return, she said. Daniel nodded. I know. She turned to him. But they will not make the same mistake again. Next time, they will come with stronger forces. Daniel smirked. Then we make sure next time, we're ready for them. A moment of rest. They walked away from the battlefield, moving deeper into the forest. They needed a new place to hide, to rest, and to plan their next move. After walking for an hour, they found a small cave hidden behind a waterfall. It was dark and cool, the sound of rushing water masking their voices. It wasn't much, but it was safe. Daniel sat down, leaning against the cave wall. His muscles ached, but it wasn't exhaustion, it was adaptation. His body was still adjusting to the bond. Soraya sat across from him. She studied him closely. You are changing. Daniel exhaled. Yeah, I can feel it. She hesitated before speaking. Do you regret it? Daniel thought for a moment. A week ago, he was just a man living in the mountains, trying to escape his past. Now he was bonded to an alien princess, hunted by an empire, and more powerful than he had ever imagined. Finally, he shook his head. No, I don't regret it. Soraya smiled, a rare softness in her expression. Then we move forward. The truth about Soraya. As they rested, Daniel finally asked, Why do they want you dead? You never really told me. Soraya's smile faded. She looked down, her fingers tracing patterns in the dirt. My people believe in control, she said quietly. They do not allow freedom. Every decision is made for us, who we marry, where we live, how we serve the empire. Daniel frowned. And you disobeyed. Soraya nodded. I refused to marry the man they chose for me. I refused to become a tool for war. She met his gaze. And I discovered something they wanted to keep hidden. Daniel leaned forward. What did you find? Soraya took a deep breath. A secret about my people's history. The Zinthari were not always conquerors. Long ago, we were peaceful explorers. But something changed. The leaders erased that past and turned us into an empire of war. Daniel raised an eyebrow. And you found proof? Soraya nodded. Yes, and that is why they want me dead. Daniel sighed. So we're not just fighting soldiers, we're fighting the whole system. Soraya smiled faintly. Yes. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Well, I've fought worse odds. Soraya chuckled softly. You are truly human. A dangerous decision. Silence settled between them. The night was calm, but they both knew it wouldn't last. Finally, Daniel spoke. We can't stay on Earth. Soraya's eyes widened slightly. You want to leave? Daniel nodded. If we stay here, they'll keep sending more soldiers. We need to take the fight to them. Soraya hesitated. You would leave your home. Daniel smirked. I don't have much keeping me here. Besides, if your people are as strong as you say, Earth won't be safe forever. If we want to stop them, we need to go to the source. Soraya studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. I know where we can go. A place where rebels hide. They may help us. Daniel stood up, stretching his arms. Then let's go. Stealing the ship. Their next goal was clear. They needed a ship. Soraya knew of a hidden Zinthari base nearby. It was smaller than the outpost they had destroyed, but it had what they needed. A starship. We will have one chance, she said as they approached the base. Daniel grinned. That's all I need. They moved silently through the shadows, avoiding the patrolling guards. Daniel's enhanced senses allowed him to predict movements, while Soraya used her agility to take out enemies quietly. Within minutes, they reached the landing pad. A sleek black Zinthari ship was docked, its engines humming softly. Daniel looked at Soraya. Can you fly it? Soraya smirked. Of course. They moved quickly. Daniel took out the guards near the entrance, while Soraya hacked the controls. The alarm blared just as the ship's doors opened. Time to go, Daniel shouted. They rushed inside, sealing the door behind them. Soraya took the pilot's seat, fingers flying over the controls. The ship lifted off, engines roaring as they shot into the sky. Below, Zinthari soldiers fired at them, but it was too late. They were gone. The journey begins. As they soared into space, Daniel looked out at the stars. For the first time, he realized he wasn't going back to Earth. This was the beginning of something bigger. Soraya looked at him. Are you ready for this? Daniel grinned. I was born ready. The ship's engines flared, and they vanished into the darkness of space. Two warriors against an empire, ready to change the galaxy.